What happens when one of hip-hop's most laid-back legends loses his cool on live television? Today we're breaking down the moment Snoop Dogg walked off the Today with Jenna and friends said after a conversation went completely sideways. If you want to see more breakdowns like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling me what you think really happened here. The interview started off smooth enough. Snoop walked onto the set with that signature relaxed energy he's known for, greeting Jenna and the co-hosts with handshakes and smiles. The audience was hyped, phones were out recording, and everything seemed like it was going to be another fun morning show appearance. Snoop has done hundreds of these interviews over his 3-decade career, so nobody expected what was about to unfold. Jenna opened with the usual pleasantries, thanking Snoop for coming on the show and mentioning his latest projects. He was promoting his new business ventures and talking about some upcoming music. The conversation flowed naturally at first, with Snoop cracking jokes and getting laughs from everyone on set. He talked about his family, his grandkids, and how he's been focusing on building generational wealth. Classic Snoop, keeping it real, but keeping it light. But then Jenna shifted gears. She brought up a topic that had been circulating online for the past few weeks, some controversy about comments Snoop had made on a podcast regarding the current state of hip-hop and how newer artists approach the game. Now, Snoop has always been vocal about his opinions on rap and the industry, but the way Jenna framed the question immediately changed the temperature in the room. She asked him if he thought he was being too critical of younger artists, specifically mentioning that some people online were calling him out of touch. The way she phrased it felt less like a genuine question and more like an accusation. You could see Snoop's expression shift slightly. That easygoing smile tightened just a bit. He took a breath and responded calmly, explaining that he never said he was against younger artists. He was just pointing out that the culture has changed and not all change is automatically good. Jenna nodded, but then she pressed further. She mentioned specific names of artists who had allegedly taken shots at Snoop on social media after his podcast comments. She asked him if he felt like he owed them an apology for what he said. That's when things started to get tense. Snoop leaned back in his chair, and you could tell he was measuring his words carefully. He said he didn't owe anybody an apology for speaking his mind, and that if people took offense to honest observations about the industry, that was their problem, not his. One of the co-hosts, trying to lighten the mood, jumped in with a joke about generational differences. But Jenna wasn't letting it go. She circled back, asking Snoop if he understood why younger artists might feel disrespected by someone of his stature, criticizing their work publicly. She used the word disrespected with emphasis, and that seemed to flip a switch. Snoop sat up straighter and his tone changed completely. He told Jenna that he's been in this game since before most of these artists were born, and that respect goes both ways. He said he's always shown love to people who put in real work, but he's not going to pretend that everything coming out today is fire just because it's popular. He pointed out that when he came up, legends would check younger artists, and that's how you learned. That's how you got better. He said today's culture is too soft, too sensitive, and everybody wants praise without putting in the effort. Jenna fired back, saying that maybe the issue wasn't that artists are too sensitive, but that older generation, figures like Snoop, don't understand how different the landscape is now. She talked about social media pressure, mental health, and how public criticism from someone like Snoop can genuinely impact someone's career and well-being. She asked him if he'd ever considered that his words carry weight, and that maybe he should be more careful with how he uses his platform. The audience was dead silent at this point. This had gone from a fun morning show interview to a full-blown debate. Snoop's jaw clenched, and he told Jenna that he's been using his platform for over 30 years to uplift his community, support young talent, and build opportunities for people who look like him. He said he's not going to be lectured about responsibility by someone who doesn't understand the culture he came from or the battles he fought to even have a platform. Jenna, clearly not backing down, said that understanding the culture doesn't mean giving someone a pass to tear others down. She said that just because someone is a legend doesn't mean they get to act however they want without consequences. She brought up the fact that several artists had publicly said they lost respect for Snoop after his comments, and she asked him point blank if he cared about that. Snoop stared at her for a long moment. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. He finally spoke, and his voice was measured but ice cold. He said that he's earned every ounce of respect he has, and if some people want to withdraw, over an honest opinion, then they never really respected him in the first place. He said respect isn't something you demand, it's something you earn. And too many people today confuse popularity with respect. Another co-host tried to step in again, suggesting they move on to talk about Snoop's business ventures, but Jenna kept pushing. She asked Snoop if he thought his attitude was part of the reason why there's such a divide in hip-hop right now between the older generation and the new school. She suggested that maybe, if veterans like him were more supportive and less critical, the culture would be more unified. That was the breaking point. Snoop let out a laugh, but there was zero humor in it. He told Jenna that she clearly didn't do her homework before this interview, because if she had, she'd know about all the young artists he's collaborated with, mentored, and put on over the years. He rattled off names, projects, and specific examples of how he's supported the next generation. He said the difference is he supports talent and authenticity, not clout chasers and industry plants. Jenna shot back that calling artists industry plants was exactly the kind of dismissive rhetoric that creates division. She said that not everyone has the same path to success and that gatekeeping what counts as real hip-hop is toxic. She told Snoop that his generation's way of doing things isn't the only valid way, and that maybe it's time for legends to step back and let the new generation define the culture for themselves. Snoop's expression went completely cold. He asked Jenna how long she'd been covering hip-hop. She hesitated, then said she's been a fan for years and has interviewed many artists. Snoop pressed her, asking specifically how long she's been involved in the culture, not just as a journalist but as someone who actually understands it from the inside. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Jenna, clearly uncomfortable now, tried to redirect by saying that you don't have to be from the culture to recognize problematic behavior. She said that, as a journalist, her job is to ask tough questions and hold people accountable, regardless of their legacy. She told Snoop that just because he's a legend doesn't mean he's above criticism. Snoop nodded slowly, then asked her if she held that same energy when interviewing everyone, or if he was being singled out. He pointed out that she seemed awfully comfortable questioning his character and his contributions. But he wondered if she'd grill a pop star or a rock legend the same way about their opinions on their respective genres. The implication was clear, and the awkwardness in the studio was palpable. Jenna insisted that she treats all her guests the same and that this wasn't personal, it was professional. She said the questions she was asking were based on real concerns that real people in the hip-hop community had expressed. Snoop countered by saying that the hip-hop community is not a monolith, and that just because some people on Twitter have opinions doesn't mean they represent the entire culture. The back and forth continued, with neither side giving an inch. Jenna kept pushing about accountability and evolution, while Snoop kept emphasizing authenticity and earned respect. The other co-hosts were practically frozen, unsure how to intervene without making things worse. The audience, still recording everything, was witnessing one of the most uncomfortable morning show moments in recent memory. Then Jenna made a comment that would prove to be the final straw. She suggested that maybe Snoop's reluctance to adapt and embrace change was less about protecting hip-hop culture and more about protecting his own relevance. She said that sometimes, legends hold on to the past because they're afraid of becoming obsolete in the present. The words hit like a slap. The studio went even quieter somehow, if that was possible. Snoop's face didn't show anger exactly. It showed something worse, complete disbelief. He sat there for a second, just staring at Jenna like he was trying to figure out if she actually just said what he thought she said. Then he leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and when he spoke, his voice was low and deliberate. He told Jenna that in all his years of doing interviews, across every type of media, in every country, he'd never had someone question his relevance to his face like that. He said it was disrespectful, not just to him but to everything he's built and everyone who came up with him. He pointed out that he's sold millions of records, built multiple successful businesses, crossed over into mainstream media in ways most rappers never could, and he's done it all while staying true to himself. He asked her what exactly about that screamed obsolete to her. Jenna, to her credit or her detriment depending on how you look at it, didn't back down. She clarified that she wasn't saying he was obsolete, but that his comments about younger artists suggested a fear of the changing landscape. She said that when established figures constantly criticize the new generation, it often comes from a place of insecurity about their own position. She told him that evolution is natural and that resisting it makes you look out of touch, regardless of your past accomplishments. Snoop laughed again, that same humorless laugh from before. He told Jenna that she was doing a lot of armchair psychology for someone who didn't know him. He said she was making assumptions about his motivations based on a narrative she'd already decided on before he even walked through the door. He accused her of not actually listening to what he was saying, but instead just waiting for her turn to push her agenda. One of the co-hosts finally found their voice and tried to mediate. They suggested that maybe both sides had valid points and that this was just a misunderstanding that had gotten heated. They proposed moving the conversation in a different direction, maybe talking about Snoop's positive impact on the community or his upcoming projects. But Jenna wasn't done, and neither was Snoop. Jenna said that if Snoop felt attacked, maybe that was something worth examining. She suggested that sometimes defensiveness is a sign that criticism has hit a nerve, and perhaps there was truth in what she was saying that he didn't want to confront. She told him that growth requires self-reflection, and that even legends can benefit from taking accountability when they've missed the mark. Snoop's response was immediate and sharp. He told Jenna that she was conflating defensiveness with having self-respect. He said there's a difference between being open to criticism and allowing someone to disrespect you on their platform while acting like they're doing you a favor. He pointed out that he came on the show in good faith, expecting a conversation, not an ambush disguised as journalism. Jenna protested that this wasn't an ambush. These were legitimate questions based on statements he'd made publicly. She said that if he's going to make bold claims about the state of hip-hop in public forums, he should be prepared to defend those claims when questioned. She told him that this is what real journalism looks like, asking the hard questions that fans want answered, instead of just lobbing softballs to make guests comfortable. Snoop countered by saying that hard questions and disrespect are not the same thing. He said, "A good journalist knows how to challenge their guest without insulting them, how to dig deep without crossing lines." He told Jenna that she'd crossed multiple lines in this interview, and that her approach had less to do with journalism and more to do with creating a viral moment at his expense. The accusation hung heavy in the air. Jenna's face flushed and she immediately denied it. She said that everything she'd asked was relevant and newsworthy, and that if Snoop couldn't handle being questioned about his own public statements, maybe he shouldn't make them. She said that accountability matters, and that being a legend doesn't exempt you from it. Snoop stood up from his chair, not quickly, not dramatically, but deliberately. He adjusted his jacket and looked directly at Jenna. He told her that he's been accountable his entire career. To his family, his community, his fans, and himself. He said he's answered for his mistakes, owned his growth, and never pretended to be perfect. But what he won't do, what he's never done, is sit somewhere and let someone question his integrity and his contributions based on their own limited understanding of a culture they're outside of. Jenna stood up too, matching his energy. She said that she wasn't outside of the culture, that hip-hop is universal now and belongs to everyone who loves it, not just the people who came up in it. She said the gatekeeping who gets to have opinions about hip-hop is exactly the problem, and that Snoop's attitude was a perfect example of why there's so much division. Snoop shook his head slowly. He told her that there's a difference between loving something and understanding it, between being a fan and being part of the fabric. He said that hip-hop was born out of specific struggles, specific communities, and specific experiences, and while anyone can appreciate it, not everyone gets to define it or rewrite its values to fit their comfort level. Jenna argued that cultures evolve, and that clinging to some mythical, authentic version of hip-hop that only existed in the past is limiting and regressive. She said that today's artists are creating their own authentic experiences and that their hip-hop is just as valid as his generation's was. She told him that maybe instead of criticizing evolution, he should celebrate that the culture he helped build has grown beyond its original boundaries. Snoop responded that evolution doesn't mean abandoning the principles that made something great in the first place. He said that there's a difference between growth and dilution, between expanding and losing your identity. He told Jenna that when everything becomes hip-hop, nothing is hip-hop, and that standards and accountability within the culture aren't gatekeeping, they're preservation. The philosophical debate was intense, but underneath it, you could feel the personal tension. This had become about more than just hip-hop or generational differences. This had become about respect, about boundaries, about who has the right to speak on what and how those conversations should be had. Another co-host tried once more to cool things down, suggesting they take a quick break. But Jenna pushed forward, asking Snoop directly if he regretted any of the comments he'd made about younger artists. She asked if, given the reaction and the controversy, he would take any of it back or rephrase it. Snoop's answer was firm and immediate. He said he wouldn't take back a single word because everything he said was true as he saw it. He said regret would imply he'd done something wrong. And speaking honestly about the state of his culture wasn't wrong, it was necessary. He told Jenna that if more people in positions like his spoke up instead of worrying about being canceled or losing popularity, maybe the culture would be in a better place. Jenna pressed on, asking if he really believed that public criticism was the right way to address his concerns. She suggested that maybe going on podcasts and making sweeping statements about an entire generation of artists was less about helping the culture and more about generating headlines. She told him that in the age of social media, perception matters, and if his public persona is coming across as bitter, that's something he needed to address. Snoop's patience was clearly wearing thin. He told Jenna that he's not a brand manager, he's a person, and he's going to speak his mind whether it's palatable to everyone or not. He said that the expectation that he should sanitize his opinions to avoid offending people is exactly what's wrong with the industry today. Authenticity used to matter, he said. Now everyone just wants performance. Jenna said that his legacy was being written right now, in real time, by how he treated the next generation. She told him that plenty of legends have tarnished their reputations later in their careers by failing to adapt or by alienating younger artists. She suggested that he was at a crossroads where he could choose to be a bridge or a barrier. Snoop stared at her for a long moment. Then he did something nobody expected. He smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who'd made a decision. He told Jenna that he appreciated her concern for his legacy, but that he didn't need career advice from someone who fundamentally misunderstood everything he stood for. He said that this interview had made it crystal clear that there was no productive conversation to be had here. He thanked Jenna for having him on, and the way he said it was loaded with sarcasm. He told the co-hosts it was good seeing them. Then he looked back at Jenna one more time. He said that he'd been in this industry long enough to know when someone was more interested in making headlines than having a real conversation, and that he wasn't going to participate in whatever this was anymore. Jenna's expression shifted from confrontational to concerned. She tried to walk it back, saying that they were just having a discussion and that disagreement is healthy. She told Snoop that she didn't mean any disrespect and that these kinds of debates are what make for compelling television. She asked him to sit back down so they could finish the conversation properly. But Snoop was already removing his microphone. He told her that calling it a discussion was generous, and that what she'd done was come at him sideways from the moment he sat down. He said he'd given her chances to course correct, to actually engage with what he was saying instead of trying to score points, but she'd chosen to keep pushing. He said that was her choice, and walking away was his. One of the co-hosts stood up and tried to reason with him. They apologized if things had gotten out of hand and said that maybe everyone just needed to take a breath and reset. They reminded Snoop that the audience was invested and that leaving now would only create more controversy. Snoop looked at the co-host with something close to sympathy. He told them that he understood they were trying to keep the show together, and he respected that. But he said that his self-respect mattered more than any show, any audience, or any potential controversy. He said that if walking off created headlines, so be it, because staying and continuing to be disrespected would create the wrong kind of precedent. Jenna interjected, her voice rising slightly. She said that Snoop was being overly sensitive and that if he couldn't handle tough questions, maybe he shouldn't do interviews. She told him that walking off just proved her point about him being unable to handle criticism. That comment made Snoop stop in his tracks. He turned back to face her fully, and when he spoke, his voice was calm but cutting. He told Jenna that there was a difference between tough questions and disrespect, and that she'd crossed that line repeatedly. He said that he sat through countless interviews where people challenged him, and he'd never walked off any of them because they were conducted with professionalism and respect. He told her that what she did wasn't journalism, it was a setup. He said she'd come into this with an agenda to paint him as a bitter old head who was out of touch, and nothing he said was going to change that narrative because she wasn't actually listening. He said the fact that she was now trying to flip his departure into proof of her argument just showed how disingenuous the whole thing had been from the start. Jenna fired back that if he felt set up, maybe it was because his own words and actions had put him in that position. She said that she was simply holding up a mirror to what he'd put out into the world, and if he didn't like what he saw, that wasn't her fault. She told him that accountability means accepting when you've made mistakes, not running away when confronted about them. Snoop let out a long breath and shook his head. He told Jenna that she could spin this however she wanted for her audience, but that anyone who actually understood the culture would see this for what it was. He said that he'd given her a platform to have a real conversation about something important, and she'd chosen to turn it into a spectacle. Jenna made one more attempt to keep him there. She told Snoop that leaving would only fuel the narrative that he couldn't defend his positions. She said that if he truly believed in what he'd said, he should stay and make his case instead of running. Snoop smiled again, that same knowing smile. He told Jenna that he'd been making his case for 30 years through his music, his actions, and his impact. He said he didn't need to prove anything to her or to anyone watching. He said that the people who know, and the people who don't know aren't going to learn from an interview that was designed to make him look bad from the jump. Jenna asked him if he thought his fans would understand that, or if they'd see this as him backing down from a challenge. She said that this moment would be clipped, shared, and analyzed across every platform. Snoop told her that he'd learned a long time ago not to make decisions based on how they'd be perceived on social media. He said his real fans would understand exactly why he left, and the people who didn't understand weren't his fans anyway. Jenna told Snoop that he was making a mistake. She said that walking off would be used against him, that it would be seen as weakness. She said that legends are supposed to rise above the moment, not run from it. Snoop looked at her with something between pity and disappointment. He told her that legends became legends by knowing when to fight and when to walk away, by understanding which battles were worth their energy and which ones were wastes of time. He said that this conversation was a waste of his time, and he was done wasting it. He told the crew he was sorry they had to witness this. He acknowledged the audience, thanking them for coming out and apologizing that they didn't get the show they probably expected. He said that sometimes things don't go as planned, but that he hoped they could understand and respect his decision. Then he turned to leave. Jenna called after him, asking if he had any final words for the people watching at home. Snoop paused, looked back over his shoulder, and said just one thing. He told them to know their worth, and never let anyone, no matter how big their platform is, make them feel small for standing up for themselves. He said that respect is non-negotiable, and that applies whether you're a legend or just starting out. With that, he walked off the set. The cameras kept rolling, catching his exit as he disappeared into the backstage area. The studio was left in stunned silence. Jenna stood there, visibly processing what had just happened. The co-hosts looked at each other, unsure of how to proceed. The audience was frozen, some still recording, some just sitting there in disbelief. Jenna eventually turned back to the camera and tried to recover. She told the audience that tensions had run high and that sometimes interviews go in unexpected directions. The way she framed it suggested that the fault lay with Snoop, not with how the interview had been conducted. The clip was online within minutes. Multiple audience members had been recording the entire exchange, and it spread like wildfire across every social media platform. The reactions were immediately divided. Some people praised Snoop for standing up for himself and refusing to be disrespected. They argued that Jenna had crossed lines and that his decision to leave was justified. They said it was a powerful statement about boundaries and self-respect. Others criticized Snoop for being unable to handle legitimate questions. They argued that he'd been too sensitive, that Jenna was just doing her job, and that walking off made him look defensive. They said that if he's going to make bold claims about hip-hop and younger artists, he should be able to defend those claims when challenged. Hip-hop artists started taking sides. Some veterans came out in support of Snoop, saying they understood exactly why he'd left and that respect is paramount in the culture. Younger artists were split, some agreeing that the interview had been disrespectful, others feeling that Snoop's walk-off validated concerns about him being out of touch. The phrase, "Know your worth," that Snoop had said on his way out, became a rallying cry for his supporters. It was quoted and turned into content within hours. People saw it as a powerful statement about self-respect and boundaries, about refusing to participate in situations that diminish you. So what do you think about how this all went down? Was Snoop right to walk off, or should he have stayed and continued the debate? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more breakdowns like this.